Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome back to Inspiring Leadership Extra with Oliver Johnston. And Oliver, who is a teacher, a facilitator, and a coach, a great friend of mine for many years, and a man who I've learned a lot about, particularly the whole topic and practice of inspiring leadership. Oliver, we've had a good chat already, but I'm really interested in your life and your experiences, particularly in Northern Ireland and social work and a whole variety of fascinating things you did before you even went into leadership. Do you want to talk about your upbringing, life, who inspired you? Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be here. I think like a lot of fortunate people, when I look back, the most important thing was having a loving family, and a loving family that were courageous, that stood for something, that had a belief system and whatever. And I think that was just a wonderful way to get a start in life. Later on, I was a competitive swimmer, and so I worked with one of my quiet heroes in my life is Bobby Medine, who was my swimming coach, and is still today on the bank of the swimming pool at 6 o'clock in the morning, teaching the next generation of kids. So over 60 years, he has done that every day, and there's something about longevity and just repeating things and being true to whatever it is you believe in. But I also learned from that notion that of the 10,000 hours that you need to master something, and all of those hours of getting to master that have stood me in good stead after that. I then became a social worker, and I do. Most of the skills that I have today are actually skills I learned as a social worker, not as a management consultant, not as all those other things, because they're people skills. And that was also in the time of the so-called Troubles in Northern Ireland. And I think that was the thing where you learned pretty quickly. I was 17 when the Troubles started, that you're either going to be a victim of it. Sometimes that was unavoidable, just because of chance. But you can either be a victim of it, or you would need to stand for something. And I think that was a big lesson to me in terms of standing for something. One of the things I stood for was I have a right to travel anywhere in the city. Other people don't have the right to tell me that. So I would travel throughout the city. I would spend in Belfast anywhere. I would travel in Derry and whatever. So in a sense, I got to see Northern Ireland at that time in a way that very few people did, because most people went, it's not safe to go there, it's not safe to go there. And sometimes you have to go somewhere that's not safe.
But I remember an incredible story about you going into the Divis flats to a lady who you'd had to remove the child from it. Can you just tell that story? Because I just found that phenomenal.
Funnily enough, I was contacted recently about that, and needed to recall the story to some solicitors who were working on some stuff, but it's a long time ago. It was just that sense of that at that time. And I don't want to big it up, and I don't want to make it bigger than it is. But if you needed to do something as a social worker, like remove a child from a dangerous home, not only did you need to get the police involved, but you also needed to talk to the paramilitaries so that they would create the space to let the police in to do what they needed to do. And the police couldn't go in without having an army presence as well. So you had this huge operation. Funnily enough, the day afterwards, I went down to see the mother, who was very distressed, and she saw me coming, and she opened the door into the flats, and she shouted at the top of her voice, "I've told everybody that you're an effing Protestant." Right? This is
explain about Divis flats to people who don't know
it. So it's a high-rise sort of conurbation. It's exclusively Catholic and Republican, and she didn't know anything about me and my background, but she said, "I've told everybody you're a Protestant." She calmed down and later on she said, "Oliver, I know you're not a Protestant, but it was the worst thing I could think of to say. And I am a Protestant." So it's just all of that was going on at the time. And yet a bit like what we're going through today. it becomes normal very quickly.
Yeah.
And you just
Yeah.
go, well, I'm either going to go under this or I'm going to go through it and do what I need to do. And I think that was a great lesson for me. It's not about courage. It's just about going, well, I have a choice. Either I give in to this or I stand up and do what I need to do.
Yeah, because I mean that was so threatening to you. You know, the strongest Republican area. You know, the IRA were everywhere around there. Someone could just take you around the back with a pistol and blow your head off. And General John Stoker, who I had on one of my earlier series, John was working undercover and saw his colleague in the police get his head blown off in an ambush when they were both taken, and he was then interrogated and beaten to a pulp for 2 days until he was rescued by his own platoon. But that's a story in itself.
Yeah.
But you also, I seem to remember, were you not driving a post van around and there was some gun battle going on either side of the tenement you were in or something? What was that story? Do I remember that right?
Yeah, I mean, I had an old post office van that I had painted yellow, just with a paintbrush, because everything got, just, there's no point having a good car at that point. And I was sitting on the floor in the back of a terraced house talking to a woman about her son who was being quite difficult. And there was a gun battle going on outside. Now, this is unusual, but it was a it was a gun battle between two factions of the IRA at that point. And I got up to leave. We waited until everything quietened down. Got up to leave, and the woman said to me, "I take it you're not driving your van today." And I went, "Oh, why is that?" She said, "Oh, right, no, it's just that the provisional IRA opened up on the official IRA out of the back of a yellow post office van, just like yours." Right? Now, that's not a story about anything other than you can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and whatever else. So and I think you learn a lot from being close to things, and you would know from the army, and and people who live in areas with great poverty and whatever. You get to know what it's like to be in the face of things like that. And there is a bit, if you live as long as I live, it's because of good fortune, because you haven't been the one who was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, fascinating. And so from your time in social work, and you are incredibly emotionally intelligent with people, reading a room, intuitive. I've seen you do it, really ask the awkward question that no one else wanted to ask, but they're all thinking it. How did you learn that in social work? I mean, obviously mistake and learning from it, because you're very relaxed about learning. Okay, didn't work, I'll try something different. Tell us a bit more about your learning from those days in social work and what worked and what didn't as a leader.
I did find myself at one point in between a young person and people who were out to do him no good, who would have with a punishment shooting, so that they wanted to shoot him. I don't know whether it was dead or whatever. And you do learn, I think, that you need to say what needs to be said, and you need to take a risk to say it, and you need to stand for your principles. And what I've learned is, if you do that, it might be uncomfortable, but it is very seldom wrong. It's the trying to say the things that are politically easy to say, or try and not be clear, are the things that actually get us all into trouble. So I think that would be a big lesson for me. And as I've gone through life, I mean, one of the things for me is working with senior teams. And I know you, Jonathan, sometimes people would say, "Do you never get nervous working with senior teams?" And I always laugh to myself and go, if you knew who I had worked with in my life, you would realize how that's not a frightening or scary thing at all. It still means you want to be a bit nervous and going in to do anything, but everything is built on the things you've learned and experienced before.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And what else in your life has really shaped you as you've gone along and made you the coach, facilitator, and teacher you are today?
Um, I think one of the biggest things is actually having been a coach for 20 years and
Right.
just having the privilege um, to sit alongside leaders as they think, they worry, they break through, they go back and go, I didn't do that the way it should have been done. And just to have the privilege of sitting with someone as they do that. And I have a great belief, as I know you have, that we're at our best as coaches when we're highly present, but leaving the space open. And just, it's somebody said to me once, it should be like, if you're being coached, it should be sitting like beside a still pool, um, and a deep still pool. So if I can, at any stage, be anything like that, it's a great place to learn from. And that's been a huge influence on me because, like, in any curve of distribution, you get to see and experience the people who are maybe not as good as this thing as leadership and being inspiring at one end of the continuum, and then the people who are just kissed with genius at the other end, and then that big group in the middle who, if they focus on it, can learn to be inspiring, can learn to lead well, and just to be part of that, with the occasional sharing of some um, opinion or advice, because I think that's part of it as well, is just sharing your experience.
I think so. And I'm interested in two areas, which I'm sure others listening would be too. One is we're at the moment, as we record this, in the middle of a global pandemic.
Mm.
You've been in lots of crises in your life. You know, Northern Ireland in the Troubles was a hell of a crisis, and it never seemed to end. It would go on and on. I don't think people realize just the scale of this, the depression, the economic depression that we're going to go in, like worse than 1929, 35% drop in GDP. And it's really going to hit the helping professions. I'm not talking about nursing and doctors and those things, but the professions where it's a choice whether they spend money on psychotherapy, on coaching, on leadership development, on team events or virtual team events or speaking. What's your view on what's going on and what the impact will be in the coming months and years on our coaching profession?
I mean, there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, that although it's devastating for people, both in terms of obviously the loss of life and the families, and also the way it has taken away our civil rights to some extent in terms of being able to just go out and walk about or whatever, that it is this time, it's a singular issue and it will be resolved. And to me, in that situation, the world will come back to some sort of normality really relatively quickly once it gets to a certain point. Now, how long that is, I have no idea. It's different to other crises we've had where there's been multiple reasons as to why the situation has arisen. So I didn't ever believe, if we go back to what happened in Northern Ireland, I didn't ever believe I would see peace or some semblance of peace. But when I came, it actually came really very quickly. Now, there'd been a huge amount of work done behind the scenes, but it actually happened, and much sooner than I ever believed it would. So I'm an optimist in these things. I think in terms of things like discretionary spend by organizations, that pretty soon, if what we do is worthwhile, people come to realize that they need it. And actually, maybe if they don't, maybe we need to re-examine what we do and go, well, if it's part of discretionary spend, what's the point of doing it? So again, it's a point for me of examining what we do, the way we do it, the impact that it has, and the appetite that people will have for it. I mean, I've been very interested to just speak with my colleagues about how much the whole area of coaching and those other support services, training and development, all of those things have really just disappeared. And they will stay disappeared for a while. I suspect if we're worth what we think we're worth, it will come back perfectly okay in a relatively short time. But let's wait and see.
Yeah, no, and that brings out, thank you for that insight. It also brings out the topic of leadership. And I'm seeing too many organizations where there's a decision made to keep the lights on and stop the wheels falling off. we're going to stop any discretionary spend on leadership development. It's just, we can't afford to do it. And that begs the question, is leadership not that important in the middle of a crisis or a global pandemic and the economic impact? Really, is that the thing you should be stopping, leadership? I don't know. What's your thoughts?
I think there's a couple of, I think actually, Jonathan, we're at the end of the era of people are going away to be developed as leaders and to have things done to them. I'm a great supporter of MBAs, for example. I think they're a great education. But in a time of crisis, I don't think going to do your MBA is a particularly top priority. I do think we've got to find ways to bring support and reflection and learning to people in the middle of the crisis and as they do what they do. So I notice with interest the emergence of lots more podcasts, much more teaching using social media, much more in the moment coaching. And I think that's the way we should go anyway, and this will maybe accelerate that to it. I've got this thing about learning should be delivered on the job, close to the job, or off the job. And it should be on the job if at all possible. It should be close to the job second, and it should only be off the job if there's a really distinct reason to do that. And yet I think we still do it the other way around. So I think I welcome that as a challenge to us, as how we really do support people in leadership. But that sense, if we learn our leadership in the Crucible, so this is a great time to learn what sort of a leader you are, who you are as a leader, and what you're really good at, and how resilient you are, and all of those things. So a little bit of reflection can probably move our learning as leaders a huge amount over this next period of time. If we just go blindly through it in the panic, we not learn very much. But if we can find that moment to be mindful, to pay attention on purpose to what we're doing, that might be the key to it.
I think that's very insightful. And the idea of the crucible is a discussion point we talked about before in the fire and the furnace of some of the toughest things. And I think through our conversations, I've been quite a fan of the Stoic philosophy and read a lot around the topic, and particularly in some of the toughest moments in my life. And there's a challenging time going on for me right now. I'm finding great solace in Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and how that the only thing you can control is your own actions, and to a certain point your own thoughts, though your thoughts can run away with you, as you know, in social work and mental health issues. But to actually control the controllables rather than constantly checking social media and stressing about things you have no control over. What you can do is you can stay at home, help the NHS, save lives, but so that's an action you can, but I can't control what's happening in London while I'm here in Lincolnshire or whatever it might be. So I think that was very helpful. But let's talk about your moments in the Crucible. And if you were to pick one moment that was really perhaps the darkest part of your life, a really tough time, what was the situation, and what was your learning from it, and how has that made you the fine leader you are today, who has that humility and courage to be there for other people, be the still pool for others?
Quite a few years ago, I was part of a consultancy, and because of a difference of opinion and an action of one of the partners that, as far as I was concerned, was completely unacceptable. It was one of those moments where you had to say, okay, this is a real point of truth. And I mean, for all of us, our houses were on the line. The bank don't, running a business, the bank owned our houses. And so this is a huge decision. And I, with two of my colleagues, decided that this was a point of principle and a point of standing up for what is right, not the consequences of doing that. So we made a decision to finish the partnership, to tear down the thing that was giving us our living and whatever else. And once we made the decision, we didn't ever go back and reconsider the decision. We just made it and said, that's the right thing to do. As with all good stories, the result of it was that within 2 years, we had the new business we set up had been acquired by a PLC, which is always a nice thing to happen. And in a sense, the rest is history. But it was that moment of going, you need to stand up. You need to take the decision on what is right, not what is most comfortable, and then stick with it. And the other thing I learned was that if you do that with other people and you know them, you can trust them because they will come on that journey with you. And those two other people are still people that I admire probably most in my career because we went through that together.
That's a very powerful story.
Mm-hmm. It is a very scary. It's that moment of going when you're really scared. What have you got to hang on to? You've only got what is the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. Everything else you can't trust around it. So that was my big learn.
Yeah, fantastic. And I've seen you do that as well. You've been very principled, and I think principle-centered leadership. And you've read so widely and so deeply in a whole range of leadership approaches. There's millions of books on leadership. But what are the lessons from your life, stories, have shaped the way you lead and the way you coach? For example, I was thinking of the time that I think you encouraged me to meet Nancy Klein.
Yeah.
Been very impressed reading her book. And Lee and I have both been trained by Nancy. Nancy's become a great friend of yours and mine, Lee's, and has influenced my children. In fact, she spoke at Harriet's when she was head girl at her school, the Mount. I invited Nancy to come and speak at the Mount, and she was, of course, a Quaker by upbringing.
Yeah.
And that was profound, just hearing her speak. So tell me a bit about those kind of things.
Two big influences in my life from the let's think this through perspective are Stephen Covey, who I worked with in the early days of the Covey Leadership Center, and when the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People really just appeared in the world. And he was very influential to me just in terms of how he said what he said. So it was about the person and the message. And I still have hold that very dearly. And the second person is Nancy. And both of them, for me, when I read their stuff, was like coming home. I read it and went, I know this stuff. But again, to be incredibly impressed by the eloquence with which it is expressed and put forward. I had the opportunity to, on a number of occasions, to be with Nancy as she's addressed an audience and asking people afterwards what they felt. The message is the same as, how did someone as tiny and as mild in one sense hold the attention of everybody in the palm of her hand for an hour? And it's quite simple because she has a message which is very pure, and she is the representative of her message. So there's complete sort of coherence between the two. I introduced her to a session one time, which she laughed at, which was, I said, I'm a great believer in simplify things down to their essence. And to me, that's why I like Nancy's approach, particularly to coaching. It was like completely stripped down. And like Coco Chanel with her little black dress, it was take away all the embellishments and you end up with a true elegance. So I introduced Nancy and I said, so for me, I want to introduce Nancy Klein, who to me is the Coco Chanel of coaching. And I still hold to that. It's that wonderful sense of get rid of all the fluff, get rid of all the nonsense, and what is the absolute essence of something. And if you can capture that, then you've probably got something which you can really use and build on. So that's been a consistent theme, I suppose, through my careers. How do you get through the complexity to the simple stuff beyond it? So there are some things that Jonathan, I would say now, I know for sure. Very few of them, but there are some things, because they're just, when you take everything else away, they just stand out as being really sort of clear key things.
No, I often have had fascinating conversations with you about a whole range of leadership concepts and principles that can be applied and used frequently. And even just now, I go for walking meetings with clients and potential clients, and this was a potential client. May not work together, but I used time to think, what do you want to think about and what are your thoughts? And I will be your thinking partner. I will not interrupt until you say to me, that's me, I'm completely finished. I have no more thoughts. And then I'll ask a supplementary, what more do you think or feel or want to say? And it was incredibly powerful. And then we use time to think dialogue. What's your question? Ask me the question. I'll play it back to you, ask you to go first. Freshest thinking. And then you give it back to me, 2 minutes back and forth. And they're gems from Nancy, and they still work so well. Being a master certified coach for the ICF, that's great. And I've done all that. Yeah. I still come back to the little black dress and the Coco Chanel. Yeah. Because it's not about you or me. It's about the leader you're with. And do you know what he said at the end of it? He said, this was so good. Really good. I thought he spoke 90%, 95% of the time. I spoke 5%. Because he said, I just have not had time in this coronavirus crisis. I've not had time to think. I've just taken minutes here and there and jotted an idea down. And all these problems I've had, it's like walking through the estate of my mind and sorting things up and tidying the garden up. And then at the end of all my thinking, it's like variation on the purist approach, but I've just shared some curiosities I had, some thoughts, some things and he goes, and you've understood it all. And it's just, that's the essence of it. And it's so great to see someone think for themselves. Yeah. Say a bit more. I've enthused, but what's excited you when you've really been there as a still deep pool for people and they've done some fabulous thinking and solved some really deep problems?
I love it when you can see the moment of breakthrough, and just to experience that is a huge privilege. When someone is really stuck and they've maybe hoped that you would give them advice, but advice doesn't come because it's not what they're going to be able to use, and just through the power of thinking well, suddenly a breakthrough comes and they go, that's what it is. That's the moment I suspect my career is probably built around in terms of satisfaction. It's that moment when that happens. Yeah. And it doesn't always happen. No. But when it does, there's nothing better than to be there at that moment.
Yeah. I so get what you're saying. And it's, why we were put on the planet, I feel, in many ways. You probably know my story of my father, and that he was killed, but I've learned so much about how to be as a leader from the men I met who'd served with him in the Navy and flown with him, and the guy whose life he saved and his co-pilot who he saved. And they said, you have a choice. You can be a victim, poor me. Yeah. Your mum was widowed at 35, 3 boys under 9. And everything in your life went wrong because you never had a dad, too young to remember him. Or your father could be your inspiration, why you do what you do. And you could find inspiration from the best leaders you meet and pass it on. Teach techniques, pass it on. And that's why I feel always so comfortable with you, because we've always, I hope, I've felt this has been the deal. We've been very abundant with each other. We've shared ideas or new concepts, or we're early learners, the pair of us. And we willingly just like, here, it's abundant. There's loads more. They gave it me. I'll give it to you. And you've been someone who's been very abundant in the way you've helped me. I just want to acknowledge that publicly now. And the inspiration you've given me. And I feel quite choked up, actually. So thank you for that. Before I get too emotional, let's have a final top tip from Oliver Johnston, the speaker, the facilitator, the coach, and the teacher. So give us a final top tip on practical, inspiring leadership.
I think for me, it is that there is no one way to be a leader. That there really is no formula. there is the opportunity to go, I will be a student of this for life. I will pay attention to what I do. I will watch what other people do. I will read if reading is something I benefit from. I will study if that's something. But in the end of the day, it's my unique journey to be the best leader I can be. And I think once we get away from looking for the recipe and go on, actually, I've got to create the recipe, then we're probably in the safest place to become the leader that to go back to I know to become the leader that we were born to be, but just not to assume that we're it already. We actually have to learn to be the leader we were born to be.
Yeah, that's great. Oliver, a real joy being with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insights and your marvelous stories and your humor. I need to have more humor in the other people who speak like you. Thank you. You are a gem. So I'll say goodbye to you at this stage, and we'll carry on chatting after this finishes. Thanks, Oliver.
Great, Jonathan. Thank you.